Why did you not like the camera when you were young?
Because I thought I wasn't good-looking enough, and I thought that all the beautiful heroes of the screen in those days were photographed through butter muslin and were all very handsome. And I did several films in England, usually when I was acting at night, so that I was always in a hurry to get away, and I hated getting up early in the morning. I couldn't really concentrate, and I didn't realize how necessary it was to be completely empty until you're ready to kind of begin the work, and to be ready to be very realistic. I'd always thought of acting as a very much more exhibitionist exercise, and as a young man I was very neurotic and highly strung, which was quite effective in certain plays, but it wasn't. In the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, I have managed to learn much more about being really natural. Natural acting was not the expected of you in the way it is now.
Has that helped you with the productions of Pinter plays, for instance?
Very much. I was amazed. I was terrified when I went into the Pinter play and into the David Story play. But the directors calmed me down. And in the same way, Providence, which I did as a film 2 or 3 years ago in France, Alain Resnais was very calm. And I think the important thing is to have a calm director who you know believes in you, but who doesn't flatter you or expect you to turn on something you've done before. And the same thing happened to me in the theatre. Peter Brook and Lindsay Anderson and Peter Hall have all given me the feeling that they were not afraid to tell me that I was old-fashioned and hammy and rhetorical and theatrical, and that I'd done that and could wash it out and find something more true. When you're young, I suppose you don't find the truth in the same way. You do things on impulse and emotion, and I've always been very emotional, which is a help, of course, for acting. And I also had a good idea of how to move and wear costume and all that. Though, funnily enough, I was considered to have terribly bad movements as a young man, and I was very self-conscious of my legs and feet and unathletic. So now when I'm older, of course, it doesn't matter very much, and that isn't so noticeable, and I've learnt to control it much better.
Do you mind playing the cameo parts, the small parts now? Although your name is writ large on the film posters, quite often you're playing just a tiny part in the film.
I don't mind a bit, because they pay me a lot of money for doing very little work, and they're very polite to me, and they give me a very comfortable chair to sit in and a nice hotel to stay in, and pay my fares. And on the whole, I find it so interesting meeting a new lot of people every few months. You see, in the theatre, I think one has a kind of fellowship which is enchanting too. You get to know your company very well, and all the crew and the stage hands and the designer and everybody, especially if you're a director too, as I was for so long. But in films, you are not given that responsibility. You sit in your room and wait till you're sent for, and very often you're not consulted, or the rushes are not shown you, and you simply have to trust. I wrote after The Elephant Man, which I was in recently in a small part, and I wrote to the director, and he sent me a wonderful Christmas present, and I said, I hope you were pleased. You didn't say much at the time, and I didn't ask what you thought of my performance, because I thought it looked like fishing for compliments. But presumably he was satisfied, and the few easy things he said to me, I suppose, dropped into the right slot. I hope so, in a way.
Has one of the great rewards of being on the stage for you, in the theatre for you, been that there is instant reaction, not only from people around you and from the director for your finished performance, but from the audience as well?
Indeed. And I was trying to think the other day, there was a thing about a very attack in an American paper on Pinter's new play, which has just opened in America, saying that his pauses were a great affectation and had become a sort of signature tune for Pinter. And I was roughing out a little article, I don't suppose I'll ever write it, about the importance of pauses. And it is very interesting, really, how you learn that pausing is as important as speech. And in the movies, of course, you can't time pauses in the same way as you can on the stage. On the stage, you judge your pauses by the reactions of the audience. And even if you've rehearsed a part quite carefully, you judge it with your fellow actors, the pausing and the pace and the speed, but you really depend on the audience as a kind of sounding board. Well, when you go into films or television, you have to judge as best you can how a laugh will come, or how a line should be pointed or marked. And you hope that it'll work all right when it's finished, but a great deal is left to the editor and to the director, who in the cutting room may alter a whole arrangement of a scene so that the points come over in a way that you couldn't have possibly calculated for yourself.
Yes, in the end it's not up to you at all.
No, it's very
somebody else
interesting
does it.
that you hand over that part of your technique to somebody else completely, which is rather pleasant after many years of having to do it for yourself. But you miss, on the other hand, the direct contact with the audience and the thrill of having a moment when you really feel. I went to Death of a Salesman the other day for the matinee. I hadn't been to a theatre for 6 months or more, and suddenly to find the house completely kind of gripped by a moment, and then to break out into either a laugh or tears and the emotion at the end. I thought, oh, this is the best after all, because it is the moment, and nothing will ever be quite the same again as this particular performance. And that is the thing we cherish very much as stage actors.
Would you still like to have a crack again at one of the major classical parts?
Well, I have hoped to do Lear again very much, but I postponed it for the moment because I didn't really feel just at the present moment I was capable of taking it on. And I didn't want to let down a company or a management in this I felt absolutely raring to go, you know.
But Lear you could certainly still do, and Prospero again.
Well, Prospero I love, and I have done it 4 times. I've done Lear 4 times, so I've had a whack at all those parts, and I'm only afraid of doing them again, and people saying, oh, it isn't as good as last time. In Hamlet, people were very varied. Some people would say the early performances were better. See, fortunately, I think audiences always have a certain nostalgia, and they think that what they saw when they were young was better than it probably really was. So I think if you're remembered for performances, the chances are they weren't as good as you get credit for. But if you do them now, you've got to do them well. And there is this fear that with a new generation, especially in the direction and acting of Shakespeare, one may seem old-fashioned and rhetorical and out of sympathy with the present day.
Next year you'll have been on the stage for 60 years. Have there ever been any total disasters for you?
Oh, many, many. And I think that everybody has them. I comfort myself with that. I mean, all of my contemporaries have had a few terrible failures. And I always think one learns a great deal from them.
What have been some of the funniest things that have happened, that have gone wrong?
Oh, well, the things that go wrong aren't always in failures. They're often in successes, too. And in the Richard de Bordeaux, which was my greatest success that I ever had as a sort of young romantic actor, at the dress rehearsal, I remember, the curtain was dropped before the last line of the play, which was the most important line of the whole play, and really ruined the whole thing. And those kind of disasters, and lights being wrong, you know, and playing a scene in pitch darkness. I think the worst of all was a disastrous production of Othello, which I did with Franco Zeffirelli, which my beard came off on the first night, and the pillars fell over, and it went on till 1:30 in the morning, and I knew it was an absolute failure. But you remember those things afterwards without great bitterness, because fortunately for me, I've been very lucky in other ways.
Yes, and you're remarkably 75 now, and enjoying life as much as ever.
Oh, very, very much.
And
I'm
as
living
busy
in a
as
country
ever.
which is new and exciting for me, and I've rather been disenchanted with London, which makes me sad because I loved it so as a young man. But I did have 50 years living in it, so I can't complain.